Welcome back, Ranger Nation, to another Customizer's Corner. And what are we corner customizing today? Well, technically nothing, but we are doing something a little bit more detailed than what I've done in the past. For those of you who are old-timers to my channel, you might remember my SH Figuart breakdown, where I took apart the parts that could be taken apart relatively easily. Now, I knew even then that there were more parts that you could get, that there were obviously more joints, more sections and whatnot, but I was going with what was beginner's level, so to speak. The easiest parts to just pull apart, break off, and get access to. And with that in mind, I was able to customize a Pink Ranger into my lovely female red, which I also did a corner customization corner on how to do, how to paint, how to set up, and all that. For today's project, or the nearby futures project, because I still have to find the right pink paint, I am turning a male Red Ranger into a male Pink Ranger. It's the same one that I used for the female Red. As you can see, their helmets were swapped long ago. And this one I was going to do a full teardown, take it apart into as many pieces as I could, break it up into as many small sections as I could, which would make the customization a lot easier. Because, for those of you who remember the video, or will check it out, if you look at things like the joints here on red, you can see the pink is deep in there, and the various connector joints. The knees I didn't manage to paint, but they come off relatively easily. It's a little rough on places because that was my first customization. So with the experience gained from that, as you can see, the corners are still pink. The joints in there are still pink. The inside of the skirt is even still pink. So it's a good first project, and of course the color came out a little bit darker than when it was originally painting on. When I painted it on, it looked red, really red, just like the helmet. But when it dried, so I'll end up priming this guy with a white base coat, or a black base coat, or probably both. I have tons of these figures to customize after all. And see how well they do after you've base coated them one color. So for those of you who want to make your own custom figure arts, this is a show for you. Now, that's future stuff. That's not stuff we haven't done yet, because I still have to get the paint and all that. But I wanted to show you. Now, unfortunately, I didn't tear this down on camera because I started fiddling with it at first to see how easy it would be to tear it down. Because normally things like this, you have to hit them with a hot air gun, a hairdryer, or whatever. I want to see how many I could just pop off without too much trouble. And honestly, it's not too hard. Let's take red here. The joint is obviously here at the knee. So all you really have to do is twist the leg around the knee. And it's not easy. I will tell you that. It's not easy. But you see how it's plying? You work on that slowly but surely, and eventually it will come loose, pop off, and you end up with this. Of course, you can do the same thing at the hinge here, but since I was doing an MMPR repaint of red to pink, I didn't see much point in trying to work this off, but you can. Just keep pulling and plying. You can even see it starting to come loose now. And of course, how it will come loose is a matter of how the joints are set in there. You may end up with the ball joint attached to the foot, or you may end up with the ball joint attached to the calf. I imagine, just from the way it was feeling when I was testing it here on camera, is that you'll end up with the ball joint on the foot. And you'll actually be able to pull the calf out. Now, that's actual when you're at joints that are just stuck in there as friction joints. Joints like here, the toe joint, are held in with a very, very tiny pin. And so pulling that out would mean you definitely need a heat gun because you have to pull that pin out, and then the joint should just fall right off. That's if you really, really want to break it down. But you need to be careful when you're pulling these joints out. Because as you can see here, on the upper calf, the joint broke. Now, that's really my fault when you get right down to it, because what I was trying to do is actually separate this entire joint from its leg and paint this separately, which you really don't necessarily need to do. Once you've got it separated like the other leg, which I didn't do that, you've got a pretty good area to work with. You can paint that all up pretty nicely. So move those all off to the side because we don't need to deal with the legs. This, of course, is easily popped off. I popped it off in my previous video. And you just paint that up as normal. Again, if you're customizing your figure into something else, you might have to worry about where you're putting lines and whatnot, but if it's MMPR or I'd say probably 90% of Power Rangers, you should be fine just painting this thing right over. No ifs, no thens, no buts, because most Power Rangers don't have a different colored diaper. Yes, I saw your video, Hassan. And yes, I agree, those armored Might figures look like they're wearing diapers. But unless you're going to make the diaper Rangers, which I guess would be what, Flashman? The females had diapers, a diaper effect at least. Then you can pretty much just paint this all one color and match it to your legs. No muss, no fuss. The belts, of course, are always a little bit trickier, because you can't just swap the belts. So even though this will be a pink Ranger, she'll be wearing the Tyrannosaurus belt. Now, of course, there are a few ways to do this, and we will deal with that in a future video. The easiest way would simply be to cut here, or here where it's a straight line, and, you know, depending on your skill with a pair of scissors, you just cut it off, go to your other figure, do the same thing, and then swap the two buckles between the two and glue them together. Or you can cut this entire thing off and make a new one with some, you know, basic plastic. However you want to do it. But it's certainly a lot more. It's a different process than simply the painting process. So something to keep in mind. The belts are a little bit different. Then we've got the diaphragm joint. Again, not too difficult. You can just dip this entire thing in paint, and then, of course, if you're going with MMPR instead of a different season, which might have a flat-colored diaphragm, or if, say, you're doing overdrive, where they might have painted sides, those are things to keep in mind. You have to be cautious of. But for MMPR, obviously, the only thing you have to keep in mind of is that little diamond there, or triangle rather. Then we move for the torso. Torso again will be a little bit tricky because you've got to mind the white in there. And it should be noted that even if you prime the entire thing over with white or black or whatever you're going to use as your base coat, I'm trying to get the camera to focus, sorry. And let me turn on the camera's light source. There we go. If you should be able to see it, because I do record in 1080p, that those diamonds are etched in there. Now, if you're doing MMPR, that's a good thing, because even when you prime it, you'll still be able to see the areas that you need to be aware of. But if you're doing something else, you might want to find some way of filling those in, Sculpey or whatever you might use. Otherwise, you'll see there'll be obviously cut lines in whatever figure you make. So that's something to keep in mind. I'll leave the light on for the rest of this review because it's probably useful for you guys to have a little bit extra light on these small details. For those of you who are curious, that little spot there, if you were to pry it out, gives you access to the screw which holds in the complex mechanics here. I have a Blue Ranger with the screw removed in the rear compartment. I will show. There are two screws on each SH Figuart. Here we are. As you can see, because all Figuarts will have another. As you can see, there's another one right there. And of course, get you access to the schematics for the thigh, for the hip joints. That's how you get to the access to the hip joints if you want to remove those and change those out, for example. So the one on the top does the same thing, or gives you access to the back joints. Which you don't normally need to get access to, because you're going to want to keep your joints intact, aren't you? That's why you're customizing SH Figuart. You like the joint system. You like how, well designed it is. But something to keep in mind, you don't need to pry those off in any way, shape, or form, because all they do is they give you access to an extra joint. It allows you to, there'll be a screw in there, you remove the screw, and then the joints will kind of fall apart and you have access to them. I kind of knew that beforehand when I went in there with blue, but what I wanted to see is just how deep it was, because I was pondering making a Tigra Figuart. For those of you who are Marvel fans, Tigra is basically a cat girl. There is a DC equivalent in Cheetah. And as you can see, Cheetah, who I use as my inspiration, puts her tail in the same position on the figure. That was obviously not an SH Figuart. So I was curious to see how possible it would be to make a Tigra type figure. Obviously I was using a male figure, and Tigra's female. But like I said, it was an experiment in learning. For if I were to continue going with that and not replace the whole with something else, I could do something like any of the Thundercats, for example, would be an option for that customization. For the back pin here, if you were to pull this off, one thing you could put in there, I would say, would be, wings. If you wanted to add wings onto your character, say you're going to make Hawkman, or Harvey Birdman, or you were going to make a Batman with like Batman Beyond with his back wings. That would be a good place you could mount them. Now, moving on up, the neck. Now, in most cases, for most figure art, you're going to keep your neck the same, because most, Rangers use a standard, white neck joint. Camera focus for a bit. There we go. And as you can see, it's not terribly complicated. There's the empty joint on the bottom, the top joint. Most figure arts are going to be using that. There's the Adam's apple. The females are a little bit different. I'll pull one up, for example. But unless you're doing something like a Go Busters or an Evil Team, the various Evil Shadow Rangers typically have a black neck brace. You're probably just going to leave this alone. Of course, the helmet, which is just swapped from a Pink Ranger. Nothing too terribly difficult in that. Then we have the arm cuffs. The arm cuffs are actually, as you can see, molded in red on this particular one, with the white painted on, and the white starting to chip off from all of my messing with them. But the cuffs are relatively simple design. It's just this little triangle. Goes in like that. The arm loop comes down from there. And you can roll this around however you need on the joint, because it's a floating piece. Bicep. Interestingly, now I found this kind of interesting. The bicep is actually cast in white. Now, I know some of you are already asking, can you hot swap all the parts? Well, yes, in theory, if you wanted to give a girl really, well-defined biceps, you could. You'd have to work off, obviously, the joint here. Then you should be able to attach it. It might be a little bit loose. It might be a little bit tight. The helmets, for example, the joints on the helmets are a little bit different. Here we go. Oh, great. I broke it in half. That happens a lot with this figure. But I actually had to carve out some of the figure joint there because the female head is actually a different size peg hole than the male joint. So that's something to keep in mind. as you can probably tell, I've had to core that a bit and make it a little bit bigger to fit this male head onto a female neck, because the joints are a bit different in size. And since that was one of my first experiments, I ended up messing up the neck joint quite a bit. Now, this doesn't affect articulation when it's actually being used, just when I'm pulling it apart. And this might be useful to some people, so I'll show it. Here's the actual joint that connects the neck to the head. And it works for the most part. It does everything I need it to do. It won't fall apart when I put it back in. It's just that when pulling it apart, it puts too much stress on those two friction joints and it falls apart. That's something to keep in mind if you're really... Because what happens when I was pulling the head off is it pulled the head off with the joint. And the other one, the male figure, the female figure, pulled the neck off with the joint, as seen here. So I had no way of easily hot swapping, so I had to pull the joint out of the neck in order to swap them properly. And then once I swapped them, then the head figures were a little bit different. So those things you have to keep in mind when you're working with customizing your Figuart. Of course, we've already covered the cuffs, so I put that off to the side. We covered the bicep, I'll put that off to the side. That's just the side holster. They're all the same size. And that is the same bicep joint. This is a lower arm. Now, of course, I've just left the hand off because the hands are interchangeable. You can actually put male hands and female hands on the same one. And in fact, when I was posing this guy originally to be the male Pink Ranger, I had him with the bow. So here we go. Here is a male hand holding the female. Here's a male arm holding the female hand, which has the molded in arrow. And it holds just fine. So you should have no trouble whatsoever with that. And of course, this one you have to be a little bit tricky with because the joint is here. Again, I could try and wiggle it out, but I didn't see any need to, because there's really no benefit to it. Yes, you have to paint this, and you have to be careful of all this. But you know, since it's mostly white anyway, you're going to be careful anyway when you get down to this part. That's something to keep in mind. Let the camera focus. As you can see, they are actually sculpted, the little lines for the diamonds, and not painted perfectly. Even S.H. Figuart makes mistakes. And that's the breakdown of a Figuart. So if you really want to customize one, that's all the various parts and pieces that you have to deal with. Those are all the various sections that we taught about. And and those are the things you have to keep an eye out for, such as breaking your joints. So, hope this was informative to Ranger Nation, and I hope to see you all in the future for more Customizer Corners, Raw Reviews, and Toku Power Weekends. Have a good day. Peace out.